The Great Instruction Manual for Civilization, that towering compendium of traffic codes, tax protocols, and property rights, was supposed to be the product of rational minds carefully weighing evidence and precedent. But what happens when one of the co-authors is an invisible deity with very particular opinions about fabric blends, dessert consumption, and the correct way to arrange furniture in bedrooms? You get a legal landscape where reading ability becomes a get-out-of-execution card, where insects receive jury trials, and where a perfectly innocent cracker becomes a weapon in the war against human desire. 1. The televised lie of twin beds. Those pristine black and white images of married couples sleeping in separate twin beds weren't documenting American marital customs. They were documenting American marital censorship. For over 3 decades, the Hays Code transformed Hollywood into a theological enforcement zone where conservative Catholic authorities wielded absolute veto power over every kiss, curse, and bedroom scene. The code didn't just suggest decency. It mandated a legally enforced nationwide fantasy where passion existed only within the bounds of decency, toilets vanished from existence, and criminals always received divine punishment. 2 priests named Daniel Lord and Martin Quigley authored this document, crowning their manuscript with the Latin inscriptions, "For the greater glory of God, and to the honor of the Blessed Virgin Mary." It was religious doctrine photocopied directly onto celluloid, and every major studio obeyed, because the alternative was commercial suicide. 2. When God decides guilt through boiling water. Medieval justice had a fascinatingly simple premise. God would not permit an innocent person to suffer. This theological conviction produced trial by ordeal, a legal system where your hand became the evidence, and divine intervention the verdict. The accused would plunge their arm into a cauldron of boiling water, sometimes oil or molten lead, and retrieve a stone from the bottom. Court officials would bandage the scalded flesh and examine it 3 days later. Clean healing meant God had declared innocence. Festering infection meant guilt. The logic was airtight if you accepted the premise and completely ignored how bacteria works. For centuries, European courts trusted this method more than eyewitness testimony, transforming every trial into a theological experiment, and every defendant into a laboratory for testing divine intervention. 3. The fugitive's divine loophole. A blood-spattered thief sprinting through medieval streets had one chance at survival: reach the church doors before the law reached him. Once he crossed that threshold and collapsed at the altar, he became legally untouchable. The law of sanctuary wasn't folklore. It was binding legal doctrine rooted in the belief that holy ground fell under God's exclusive jurisdiction, not the king's. Secular authorities could surround the building, post guards, and wait, but they couldn't extract the fugitive for up to 40 days. It created the surreal spectacle of murderers living next door to monks, protected by an invisible legal force field drawn by theological doctrine. The church became a literal timeout zone where the worst crimes earned a temporary reprieve simply because the criminal had sprinted fast enough. 4. Reading your way off the gallows. England's medieval justice system contained the ultimate cheat code, and it was powered entirely by literacy. The benefit of clergy originally protected priests from execution by routing their cases to lenient church courts. But the verification test, proving you were clergy by reading a Bible passage, quickly became exploitable. Any common criminal who could read or memorize Psalm 51:1 could claim the benefit and escape the hangman. "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your steadfast love," became known as the neck verse, because reciting it could literally save your neck from the noose. Illiterate thieves memorized it phonetically. The legal system essentially declared that literacy granted immunity from execution, transforming a theological exemption into the highest-stakes reading comprehension test in history. 5. State-sanctioned witch hunters in the modern era. Saudi Arabia employs literal witch hunters in 2025. The Anti-Witchcraft Unit, formalized in 2009 and operating under the religious police, actively investigates accusations of sorcery, fortune-telling, and spell-casting, crimes punishable by death. This isn't archaeological curiosity. These are modern witch trials conducted with government funding, legal authority, and a dedicated hotline for citizens to report magical misdeeds. Officers receive specialized 5-day training courses, teaching them to identify sorcerers, destroy black artwork, and reverse the effects of curses. The magnificent absurdity is that a 21st century government with smartphones and skyscrapers maintains a specialized police division dedicated to combating entities whose existence remains scientifically unverified. It's medieval demonology with a budget, a badge, and full legal backing. 6. The atheist employment barrier. Tennessee's state constitution contains a peculiar moral hierarchy. Article 9, Section 2 permanently disqualifies two categories of citizens from holding public office: duelists and atheists. Think about the implications. A God-fearing citizen who settles political disputes by shooting opponents at dawn remains constitutionally eligible for public service. A peaceful, law-abiding atheist who simply doesn't believe in any deity is permanently barred. The Constitution explicitly states that anyone who denies the being of God cannot hold office, creating a theological purity test embedded in the state's founding legal document. It reveals a worldview where pistols at dawn are more morally acceptable than philosophical skepticism, where violence is negotiable, but theological dissent is not. 7. Friendship as legal defense. Medieval England offered an ingenious alternative to actual evidence: character witnesses on steroids. The wager of law allowed defendants to bring 12 friends to court who would swear on the Bible that they believed the accused was generally a good, honest person. No alibi required. No contradicting evidence addressed. Just 12 oath helpers vouching for your character, and the court declared you innocent. It was a justice system based entirely on social standing and perceived piety, where having popular friends mattered more than factual guilt or innocence. The logic was theological. Surely 12 people risking their immortal souls by swearing a false oath on Scripture wouldn't lie. It transformed trials into popularity contests, where networking could literally override murder charges. 8. The cracker that was supposed to save your soul. The graham cracker sitting in your pantry is a weapon of spiritual warfare, or at least it was intended to be. Sylvester Graham, a Presbyterian minister in the 1830s, believed that flavorful food led directly to moral decay, impure thoughts, and sexual deviance. His solution was a dietary regimen so aggressively bland it would bore your libido into submission. He invented a whole wheat cracker, no sugar, no spices, no fat, specifically engineered to suppress undesirable passions and prevent masturbation. His followers, the Grahamites, were so influential that Oberlin College imposed his diet on the entire student body, even firing a professor for using black pepper. That s'more ingredient you enjoy today began as a religious crusade to make food so boring it would literally save your soul from carnal temptation. 9. Criminalizing blasphemy in modern Ireland. Until 2018, not 1718 but 2018, Ireland maintained an active blasphemy law. The 2009 Defamation Act actually strengthened it, making it illegal to publish or utter anything grossly abusive or insulting in relation to matters held sacred. This put a modern Western European democracy in the same legal category as medieval theocracies, where a bad joke about religion could trigger criminal prosecution. The potential penalty was €25,000, and the vagueness of grossly abusive created a chilling effect where comedians, writers, and everyday citizens had to calculate whether their words might offend sufficiently sacred sensibilities. Thankfully, Irish voters overwhelmingly scrapped the law via referendum, deciding their society could handle a few irreverent comments without legal intervention. 10. When adultery becomes a felony. Michigan took the Seventh Commandment and transformed it into penal code. Adultery in Michigan isn't just a marriage-ending betrayal. It's a felony carrying a potential 4-year prison sentence. While almost never prosecuted, the law remains active, lurking in the legal code like a theological landmine. It's the 10 Commandments photocopied directly into criminal statutes, where a personal relationship failure becomes grounds for state prosecution. The district attorney could theoretically be called by an angry spouse to prosecute marital infidelity as if it were armed robbery. This creates the surreal scenario where the state treats a private betrayal as a full-blown crime against public order, simply because a religious text from thousands of years ago declared it sinful. 11. Fashion as criminal activity. The Puritans who founded Massachusetts were so terrified of individual expression, they effectively made style illegal. Sumptuary laws in the Massachusetts Bay Colony outlawed gold buttons, silk ribbons, lace, and even slashed sleeves. The goal was legally mandated humility, forcing everyone to dress like sad beige rectangles to demonstrate religious devotion. These weren't fashion guidelines, they were criminal statutes with fines attached. A colorful hat wasn't poor taste, it was a prosecutable act of rebellion against divinely ordained blandness. The Puritans created a society where God essentially ran the homeowners association, and the dress code was enforced through the legal system. It was theological aesthetic control backed by state power, turning every outfit into a potential legal liability. 12. Legislating human appearance. For nearly a century, from the 1860s to the 1970s, American cities maintained ugly laws that made it illegal for anyone diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object to appear in public. These weren't ancient relics. They were enforced in modern Chicago, San Francisco, and Portland. The horrifying justification tangled religious sentiment viewing physical imperfection as divine punishment with progressive-era aesthetics demanding sanitized public spaces. Disabled street vendors lost their livelihoods. A woman known as Mother Hastings was given money to leave Portland because authorities deemed her too terrible a sight for the children to see. These laws criminalized existence itself for anyone failing to meet narrow, pious definitions of acceptable appearance, turning a simple walk down the sidewalk into a potentially illegal act. 13. The rhythmic path to damnation. For Puritans in early America, a deck of cards wasn't entertainment. It was the devil's picture book. And dancing was a satanic pipeline to moral collapse. Public dancing was outright illegal in hundreds of Bible Belt communities, enforced by actual police with actual penalties. Conservative Christian leaders believed moving your hips to a beat led inexorably to lust, degeneracy, and eternal damnation. The film Footloose wasn't Hollywood exaggeration. It documented reality for countless American towns where teenagers could face legal consequences for the profound sin of rhythmic movement. These weren't social taboos, they were municipal ordinances backed by theological conviction that dancing was sufficiently dangerous to require state intervention. It's the ultimate example of taking fun-hating so seriously you legislate it. 14. Silencing women with iron. The scold's bridle wasn't a metaphor. It was a cold iron cage locked over a woman's head with a sharpened metal plate forcing her tongue down, making speech physically impossible. This wasn't a torture device reserved for enemy spies. It was a legally sanctioned punishment in England and its colonies for women accused of gossiping, nagging, or speaking out of turn. The justification was rooted in rigid religious interpretations of female submission, where biblical verses about women's silence were transformed into an instrument of public torture. Women were paraded through streets wearing this device, humiliated and silenced simultaneously, all under legal authority backed by theological doctrine. It represents the most brutal physical enforcement of a Bible verse in history, turning Scripture into hardware designed to literally lock women's mouths shut. 15. How the Vatican created the Filet-O-Fish. McDonald's built an empire on beef, but one franchise nearly collapsed because of the Catholic Church. In early 1960s Cincinnati, a restaurant owner watched his Friday sales crater every single week. His heavily Catholic neighborhood was observing the traditional abstinence from meat, leaving a burger joint with nothing to sell. Facing financial ruin, he invented a non-meat alternative, the Filet-O-Fish. It became so wildly popular it went national, permanently altering fast food menus worldwide. Every time someone orders that breaded fish sandwich, they're participating in a centuries-old religious tradition that forced a modern corporation to adapt or die. It's a perfect example of how Vatican doctrine from medieval theologians directly shaped 21st century drive-through options. 16. The theological status of pastries. In 2001, Maine's legal system confronted a question of profound religious and culinary importance. What exactly is a donut? The state's ancient blue laws, designed to enforce the Christian Sabbath by closing businesses on Sundays, were used to fine the Holy Donut for operating on the Lord's Day. The owner mounted a brilliant defense. His products were actually bread, and bakeries enjoyed an exemption. The state of Maine then spent taxpayer money convening hearings to debate the fundamental legal and spiritual nature of fried dough. Was it bread, qualifying for Sunday sale, or was it pastry, subject to holy day prohibitions? It was a theological food fight played out in courtrooms, proving that religious laws can force absurd legal gymnastics centuries after their original purpose faded. 17. Banning Christmas in the name of Christ. The first major war on Christmas was waged by Christians against other Christians. In 1659, Puritan authorities in Massachusetts officially outlawed celebrating Christmas. They viewed it as a decadent, pagan-infested holiday with no biblical justification, just sinful feasting, drinking, and merriment. Anyone caught celebrating faced a 5-shilling fine. For over 20 years, being caught having a holly jolly time in Boston was a prosecutable criminal offense. The Puritans were so committed to theological purity, they banned the holiday commemorating their Savior's birth, deeming it insufficiently godly. It's the ultimate irony, making Christmas illegal because it wasn't Christian enough, proving that one generation's sacred tradition is another's criminal party. 18. Putting animals on trial for murder. In 15th century Europe, a pig could be arrested, assigned a lawyer, tried before a judge, and sentenced to death for killing a human. This happened repeatedly. For centuries, animals were subjected to formal legal trials in church courts based on the theological logic that, since all creatures were part of God's creation, all were subject to God's law. If a pig killed a child or beetles destroyed crops, they could be held criminally accountable. The pig would stand trial, literally propped up in court, with a defense attorney making legal arguments on its behalf. It's simultaneously the most absurd and strangely logical application of religious law imaginable. If God rules all creation, then all creation must face God's courtrooms. 19. Mandatory church attendance as criminal law. Colonial Virginia didn't just encourage Sunday church attendance. It criminalized skipping services. Missing church was illegal, enforced by the state with escalating penalties. First offense, a fine of 50 pounds of tobacco, a significant sum representing weeks of labor. Repeat offenders faced harsher consequences. The state and church were legally indistinguishable, making church attendance a civic duty equal to paying taxes. Your presence in the pews wasn't between you and God. It was between you and the Commonwealth of Virginia, which employed enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance. It was theocracy with a legal framework, where spiritual participation became a prosecutable obligation backed by government power. 20. Government-collected donations to God. Modern Germany has outsourced religious fundraising to the tax authorities. If you're registered as Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish, the government automatically deducts 8 to 9% of your income tax and forwards it to your church. It's ruthlessly efficient. Your paycheck arrives pre-tithed. The only escape is making a formal appointment at a government office to officially declare you're renouncing your faith. This has created the bizarre modern phenomenon of people scheduling breakups with God via state bureaucrat, simply to increase take-home pay. The system treats religious affiliation like a utility bill, automatically deducted and forwarded without your active participation, turning spiritual donations into government-administered automatic withdrawals. 21. Criminalizing Christmas dessert. What if your favorite holiday treat was a prosecutable offense? In 17th century England under Oliver Cromwell's Puritan regime, eating a mince pie on Christmas was genuine criminal activity. The Puritans waged literal war on Christmas, banning celebrations they viewed as sinfully decadent and Catholic. Mince pies became a symbol of everything they despised, the idolatrous Catholic Mass baked into crust. For over a decade, consuming this pastry on December 25th was an act of political rebellion. It was a period when being jolly carried legal consequences, when a dessert could make you a dissident, when England's government devoted enforcement resources to preventing pie consumption. The war on Christmas reached its logical, absurd conclusion, criminalizing the food associated with it. 22. Legislating silence on Sundays. Switzerland has transformed Sunday into a legally mandated performance of silence. In many regions, strict rest day laws rooted in Christian Sabbath concepts forbid loud or disruptive activities. Mowing your lawn, hanging laundry, or washing your car on Sunday can result in hefty fines enforced by annoyed neighbors empowered by religious legislation. It's passive-aggressive theocracy where the day of rest becomes legally mandatory quiet time, backed by state enforcement mechanisms. The ultimate irony is that peaceful activities, maintaining your property, doing chores, become criminal offenses simply because they occur on the wrong day of the week. Sunday silence isn't just culturally expected, it's legally required, transforming a religious principle into noise ordinances with theological backing. 23. Divinely mandated family planning. Deuteronomy contains surprisingly specific instructions for family continuation. If a man died childless, his brother was legally obligated to marry the widow and produce offspring to continue the family line. This practice, levirate marriage, wasn't optional. If the brother refused, the law prescribed a public ritual of humiliation. The widow would confront him before elders, remove his sandal, spit in his face, and declare his shame. It was a divinely sanctioned ceremony of disgrace, all because he declined to marry his sister-in-law and produce children for his dead brother's name. The specificity is remarkable. God apparently cared enough about family lineage to mandate not just the marriage, but also the exact public shaming ceremony for non-compliance, complete with footwear removal and facial expectoration. 24. When the king was God's personal representative. For centuries, monarchs possessed the ultimate legal cheat code, divine right of kings. This wasn't ceremonial language. It was serious legal and religious doctrine, declaring that rulers were chosen directly by God and answerable only to Him. The king's word literally was law, because the king was God's anointed representative on earth. Defying royal decrees wasn't just treason against the state, it was blasphemy against God. This doctrine fused political authority with divine mandate so completely that separating church and state became conceptually impossible. Challenging the king meant challenging God's will, creating an unassailable legal framework where earthly power claimed heavenly endorsement. It's the most powerful law ever conceived, because it makes the ruler and deity functionally identical within legal proceedings. 25. Outsourcing truth to the divine. Every courtroom oath, that ubiquitous hand-on Bible moment, is the legal system admitting it has no reliable mechanism to guarantee honesty, so it outsources the job to God. The unspoken threat isn't just perjury charges from prosecutors. It's eternal damnation for breaking an oath made on Holy Scripture. The entire judicial system relies on defendants' fear of afterlife consequences to supplement earthly enforcement. It's a legal strategy based entirely on assuming the witness believes in God, fears divine punishment, and considers that risk serious enough to outweigh whatever benefits lying might provide. Modern secular courts continue this practice, essentially incorporating supernatural enforcement mechanisms into proceedings that otherwise claim rationality and evidence-based truth-finding. 26. Construction halted by invisible residents. Iceland regularly reroutes multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects to avoid disturbing rocks believed to house elves. Highways, power plants, and housing developments have been delayed, redesigned, or completely halted to preserve stones considered homes of the Huldufolk, the hidden people. These aren't ancient legends. These are contemporary legal disputes where pre-Christian beliefs carry actual weight in planning tribunals. Courts have recognized the cultural and spiritual significance of elf habitats, forcing engineers to negotiate with advocates for invisible constituents. It creates the surreal modern scenario where construction crews consult elf whisperers before laying foundations, where geological surveys include supernatural impact assessments, where rational infrastructure planning must accommodate irrational folklore because spiritual beliefs have been granted legal standing. 27. The Papal Declaration Against Cats. In the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX issued a formal papal bull declaring black cats instruments of Satan directly associated with witchcraft. This wasn't casual theological speculation. It was official church law with the weight of holy authority. The declaration triggered centuries of feline persecution across Europe, with black cats systematically killed as demonic agents. The tragic irony? By decimating the continent's primary rat predators, this divinely inspired campaign likely exacerbated the Black Death, which spread via fleas on rats. Church law, intended to fight evil, inadvertently enabled a plague that killed millions. It's a perfect case study in how religious legislation can produce catastrophic, unintended consequences when theological conviction overrides ecological reality. 28. The elevator that stops for God. Many buildings in Israel feature Sabbath elevators, lifts programmed to stop automatically on every floor on Saturdays, eliminating the need for passengers to push buttons. It's a high-tech solution to an ancient religious prohibition against operating electrical switches on the Sabbath. Jewish law forbids work on the day of rest, and rabbinical authorities determined that button pushing qualifies. The result is a brilliantly inefficient compromise. A 40-story building becomes an automated lesson in patience, as the elevator methodically visits every floor, whether anyone needs it or not. It's 17th-century religious doctrine enforced through 21st-century automation, turning a simple vertical journey into a prolonged meditation on theological compliance. 29. The Sunday car buying prohibition. It's Sunday afternoon, your day off, and you've decided to purchase a vehicle. You arrive at the dealership to find locked doors, empty lots, and eerie silence. Why? Because in Texas, Illinois, New Jersey, and numerous other states, it's completely illegal for car dealerships to operate on Sundays. These aren't industry preferences, they're state laws. Ghostly remnants of Christian blue laws mandating a holy day of rest. You can purchase a boat, house, or jet ski on Sunday, but the American automobile industry is legally required to observe the Sabbath. It creates the absurd modern reality where specific retail categories remain bound by religious observance requirements, while others operate freely, all because century-old theological legislation remains embedded in state codes. 30. God's fashion police. Leviticus contains one of the Bible's most bafflingly specific commands: absolutely no garments woven from two different materials, particularly wool and linen. This wasn't fashion advice. For centuries, it was a serious transgression against God. The divine apparently cares deeply about fiber content, extending concern from eternal souls down to laundry tags. Orthodox communities still observe this restriction, carefully checking clothing labels for prohibited fabric blends. It transforms God into the ultimate fashion critic, the cosmic authority who monitors not just moral choices, but material composition of garments. The theological implication is remarkable. Whatever divine force created galaxies and consciousness also has very specific opinions about textile manufacturing. 31. The constitutional prohibition on alcohol. American prohibition wasn't just legislation. It was a constitutional amendment, a holy war elevated to the supreme law of the land. The 18th Amendment resulted from Protestant religious groups convinced that alcohol was literal demon brew, requiring complete elimination to create a godly nation. They didn't pass an ordinary law. They amended the Constitution itself, transforming a temperance sermon into founding-level legal doctrine. The conviction was so powerful they were willing to fundamentally alter American governance to enforce theological beliefs about beverage consumption. The result was a decade of organized crime, violence, and chaos, all unleashed in the name of piety. It's the ultimate example of religious fervor producing legislative overreach, where moral panic became constitutional mandate. 32. Bovine citizens with legal privileges. In many Indian states, cows are legally entitled to better treatment than some humans. Based on Hindu beliefs viewing cows as sacred, slaughtering one is illegal, and harming one carries prison sentences. This creates surreal modern reality, where millions of cattle wander freely, legally protected while causing epic traffic jams in major cities. They stroll through hospital corridors, block ambulances, and have legal right-of-way over everyone. It's nationwide, legally enforced traffic disruption, rooted entirely in religious reverence. Emergency vehicles wait while sacred cows cross streets. Urban planning must account for bovine residents who cannot be relocated because religious law grants them protected status. Faith-based legislation has produced a transportation system where cattle outrank citizens in road hierarchy. 33. Putting science on trial. In 1925, Tennessee arrested high school teacher John Scopes for the crime of teaching evolution. The resulting Scopes monkey trial became a national spectacle, literally a public trial of science itself. The prosecution's case rested entirely on state law, making it criminal to teach any theory denying biblical creation. It was a 20th century heresy trial, pitting the Book of Genesis against biology textbooks in a legal death match. Celebrity lawyer William Jennings Bryan argued for Scripture. The ACLU defended Darwin. The case revealed the fundamental tension when religious law confronts scientific evidence, when state legislatures attempt to enforce theological beliefs as educational standards. Teaching accepted scientific theory became a prosecutable offense simply because it contradicted religious text, transforming classrooms into theological battlegrounds. 34. The wall that hides alcohol. Until 2017, ordering a drink in Utah meant experiencing the surreal. Bartenders worked behind 7-foot barriers called Zion curtains, mixing cocktails out of sight before passing them through small openings. The official justification, rooted in Mormon cultural dominance, claimed these walls protected children from the glamour of mixology. Your martini appeared through a hole as if delivered by a helpful ghost. It was legislative performance art solving a non-existent problem, as if children's moral development hinged on not witnessing ice, gin, and vermouth combined. The curtains transformed bars into bizarre prohibition theaters, where adult beverages had to be prepared in secret, hidden from view like some shameful activity, despite being perfectly legal. 35. Religious discrimination disguised as nationalism. No Irish need apply signs plastering 19th century American cities weren't just about nationality. They were theological discrimination. This represented violent anti-Catholic sentiment, where Irish immigrants weren't merely poor and foreign, they were followers of a false religion, loyal to a foreign pope whom Protestants viewed as a tyrant. This legally condoned discrimination was fueled by theological arguments, turning disputes over communion and papal authority into justifications for denying employment and housing. Religious differences became grounds for systematic exclusion, with Protestant Americans treating Catholic Irish as dangerous others whose faith made them unsuitable for participation in American life. Theological disagreement transformed into legal discrimination, proving religion can serve as effective cover for prejudice. 36. Criminalizing profanity based on gender. Michigan maintains an old law making it criminal to use profane language in the presence of women. This legal fossil from 19th century Christian worldview treated women as delicate creatures who might faint at curse words. Imagine attempting enforcement today at concerts, sporting events, or any public gathering. The law reveals assumptions about gender, morality, and propriety baked into legal code, that women require special protection from harsh language, that male and female ears process profanity differently, that female presence transforms ordinary speech into criminal activity. It's chivalry weaponized as legislation, turning medieval notions of female fragility into prosecutable offenses. Modern reality makes the law comically unenforceable, but it remains embedded in statutes as a reminder of when theology determined gender roles down to vocabulary restrictions. 37. Blasphemy as capital offense. Pakistan's blasphemy laws represent some of the strictest religious legislation worldwide, making insulting Islam a capital crime. The laws are so vaguely worded, they've become weapons for settling personal vendettas. A simple accusation, with or without evidence, can trigger mob violence and state execution. Defendants have been sentenced to death for comments, social media posts, or rumors spread by neighbors. It's a chilling system where mere allegation becomes more dangerous than physical assault, where words carry the death penalty, where laws designed to protect religion enable persecution. The legislation creates an environment of terror where theological sensitivity overrides due process, where proving innocence becomes nearly impossible once accused, where religious law functions as state-sanctioned vigilantism. 38. The Devil's Picture Book. For Puritans, a simple deck of playing cards wasn't entertainment. It was evil incarnate, literally the devil's picture book. They believed cards were witchcraft tools, and their reasoning was bizarrely specific. The four suits represented great monarchies that persecuted Christians, while kings, queens, and jacks were idols. Playing cards were banned in Puritan communities as gateways to gambling, idleness, and damnation. The piety was so profound, it found satanic conspiracies in a game of solitaire. So intense, it required laws banning illustrated paper rectangles. It's perfect evidence of a mindset capable of discovering profound evil in the most mundane objects, where innocent recreation becomes spiritual warfare, requiring legal prohibition. 39. Two empires dividing an entire planet. In 1494, Spain and Portugal faced a problem. Their explorers kept encountering each other's flags in newly discovered lands. Their solution was audaciously simple: ask the Pope to divide the entire world between them. In the Treaty of Tordesillas, Pope Alexander VI literally drew a line down a world map. Everything west belonged to Spain, everything east to Portugal. It's the single most arrogant act of religious legislation in history. Two countries and one religious authority dividing the entire planet without consulting anyone actually living in those territories. Native populations had no voice, no representation, no acknowledgement. The Pope claimed authority to assign continents, drawing meridian lines and declaring divine approval for European conquest. This treaty shaped colonial patterns for centuries, determining modern linguistic and cultural boundaries based entirely on one man's theological authority to distribute Earth's landmasses. 40. Religious law meets traffic safety. An Amish horse-drawn buggy traveling Pennsylvania roads displays a bright orange reflective triangle on its rear. It's a fascinating collision between 17th-century religious conviction and 21st-century traffic codes. The Amish Ordnung, their unwritten religious law, commands simple living separate from modern technology. But state safety regulations demand reflectors on vehicles. The result is a compromise between completely different centuries. A 19th-century vehicle compliant with modern safety standards because of a 17th-century theological schism. State legislatures negotiated with religious communities, finding accommodations that respect both spiritual beliefs and public safety. The orange triangle represents the ongoing tension when ancient faith practices encounter contemporary legal requirements, resolved through practical compromise that satisfies neither theological purity nor complete standardization. 41. When interest rates equaled hell. For medieval centuries, Christian Europe considered charging interest on loans, usury, a mortal sin equivalent to murder. The Church's prohibition completely froze the concept of modern finance for 1,000 years. Banks couldn't function. Capitalism couldn't develop. Where did desperate monarchs and merchants turn for capital? Jewish communities, whose religious laws didn't prohibit lending with interest. This created a dangerous paradox. The very people fueling Europe's economy were simultaneously condemned as sinners for providing financial services Christians needed but couldn't offer themselves. Religious law forced European Jews into banking roles, then punished them for occupying those roles, creating centuries of economic dependence paired with religious persecution. One theological prohibition shaped financial history, determined ethnic occupational patterns, and generated lasting anti-Semitic stereotypes. 42. Criminalizing fortune-telling. New York and many jurisdictions maintain laws banning fortune-telling for profit, direct descendants of biblical prohibitions against divination. While mostly used today to prosecute obvious scams, their origin is purely religious. The laws essentially enforce God's exclusive intellectual property rights over the future. The state isn't saying psychics aren't real, it's declaring they cannot charge for services that compete with divine knowledge. It creates the absurd legal framework where claiming supernatural knowledge is acceptable as long as it's free, but monetizing predictions becomes criminal. Religious prohibition against divination has been secularized into consumer protection law, transforming theological concerns about competing with God's omniscience into fraud statutes. 43. The lunch that could kill you. During the Spanish Inquisition, authorities developed a diabolical test for identifying secret Jews and Muslims forcibly converted to Christianity. Inquisitors would offer suspects pork. To genuine converts, it was just meat. To someone secretly maintaining their faith, Eating prohibited food was a profound violation. Accepting meant betraying religious law. Refusing meant torture and execution. It was a theological trap where lunch orders became death sentences, where dietary restrictions turned into evidence of heresy. The test was brilliantly cruel, exploiting the very religious convictions being persecuted, forcing believers to choose between violating sacred law or revealing their secret faith. Food became a legal weapon, dietary compliance a matter of life or death, proving how religious legislation can transform the most mundane activities into capital offenses. 44. The Billion-Year Employment Contract. Scientology's most dedicated members, the Sea Org, sign employment contracts binding them for 1 billion years across all future lifetimes. This isn't metaphor. It's an actual legal document participants sign. While its enforceability in secular courts is questionable, its power as psychological and spiritual commitment is absolute. It's the most ambitious religious employment agreement in human history, claiming jurisdiction not just for one lifetime, but for countless reincarnations spanning eons. The contract transforms religious dedication into a legal obligation extending beyond death, beyond centuries, into a cosmic timeline. It represents the logical extreme of religious law, binding adherence not just until death, but literally forever, making spiritual commitment a contractual obligation spanning geological timescales. 45. Excommunicating insects. For centuries, the Catholic Church held formal trials against insects. When locusts or beetles destroyed crops, officials wouldn't just pray. They'd appoint a lawyer for the insects, conduct a formal trial in ecclesiastical court, and if the bugs were found guilty, formally curse them and order them to leave under penalty of eternal damnation. It was pest control fused with holy war, jurisprudence applied to entities lacking consciousness or moral agency. The Church treated agricultural pests as if they were rational beings capable of understanding divine commands, subject to church courts and vulnerable to excommunication. It's simultaneously bizarre and internally logical. If all creation is subject to God's law, then all creation, including beetles, can be tried, convicted, and punished in religious courts. 46. When Latin governs a police state. The Vatican is the only country where Latin remains an official language, where ATMs offer instructions in a dead tongue. But for over 1,000 years, the papal states weren't just a spiritual authority. They were a military and political power, commanding armies, collecting taxes, and running police forces with execution authority. The Pope wasn't merely a religious leader. He was a king who could order arrests and executions under legal authority. It was a period when the head of the church could command your death, and it was perfectly legal. Theological authority and secular power were indistinguishable, creating a theocracy where religious leadership wielded full governmental control, where spiritual guidance and state violence came from the same office, where the divide between church and state simply didn't exist. 47. When God changed his mind about geography. In early Islam, a divine revelation redirected prayer. Initially, Muhammad and followers faced Jerusalem during prayer. Then, a new revelation commanded them to face Mecca instead. This created an architectural problem. Mosques already built facing Jerusalem needed theological updates. One of Islam's oldest mosques in Medina is called Masjid al-Qiblatain, the Mosque of Two Qiblas, because it contains prayer niches facing both directions. It's a building frozen in the moment of obeying a divine legal update, an architectural snapshot of religious law changing in real time. The mosque stands as physical evidence of the day God revised the direction of prayer, when theology required immediate structural adaptation, where spiritual requirements dictated architectural orientation. 48. The apocalypse that wasn't. In 1844, preacher William Miller convinced up to 1 million followers he'd calculated the exact end of the world using biblical prophecy. October 22nd. Believers sold homes, quit jobs, and gathered in white robes awaiting Christ's return. When October 23rd dawned, their devastation was absolute. The great disappointment. But the failed prophecy didn't end the movement. It created new ones, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church. An entire religious denomination was born from theological ashes of a doomsday that never arrived. Religious law and prophecy that failed spectacularly somehow generated lasting institutions, proving that even completely wrong predictions can produce enduring religious movements, if believers reinterpret rather than abandon faith. 49. Hockey coaches and the sin of cursing. In Massachusetts, a hockey coach screaming profanity at referees isn't just unsportsmanlike. He's a sinner against the eyes of the law. A centuries-old Puritan blue law still technically on the books forbids cursing at sports officials. It's a holdover from an era when blasphemy was a public menace, when moral legislation policed language. That modern vein-popping rage at a referee's call is, by dusty legal technicality, an offense against both the official and God himself. While almost never enforced, it remains embedded in state law, turning routine athletic fury into a theological violation. The law reveals how religious concerns about public morality can fossilize in legal codes, remaining technically active centuries after cultural relevance faded. 50. The trial of a decomposing pope. In 897 CE, Pope Stephen VI orchestrated the most insane trial in history. His defendant, Pope Formosus, his immediate predecessor. The slight problem was that Formosus had been dead for 9 months. Stephen had the corpse exhumed, dressed in full papal robes, propped on a throne in the courtroom, and put on trial for perjury and illegally ascending to the papacy. A young deacon was assigned to speak for the decomposing defendant. Stephen screamed questions at the rotting body, found it guilty, stripped its papal vestments, and ordered the 3 blessing fingers hacked off. As final punishment, Formosus's corpse was thrown into the Tiber River. The Cadaver Synod represents the absolute pinnacle of religious authority fused with personal grudge, creating legal proceedings so grotesque they defy belief. A trial where the defendant literally could not defend himself, where theological disputes were settled by prosecuting decomposing flesh, where the church put death itself on trial. From prosecuting corpses to criminalizing desserts, from reading passages to escape execution to drawing lines across continents, history's intersection of law and religion has produced the most surreal legal landscape imaginable. These weren't aberrations. They were systems operating under perfect internal logic, where divine authority justified everything from insect trials to continental division. The instruction manual for civilization reveals itself as part rational governance, part theological fever dream, a testament to humanity's remarkable ability to transform faith into legislation and belief into binding statute. The legacy persists. Modern nations still collect church taxes, prosecute blasphemy, protect sacred cows, and enforce Sabbath restrictions. The divine co-author of civilization's laws hasn't retired. The signature just appears in different ink, the mandates dressed in contemporary language, the same ancient convictions enforcing themselves through ever-evolving legal frameworks.